All right, at this hour, the FBI is awaiting DNA results from a glove that was found 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home. It's been 16 days since Nancy Guthrie was abducted, and this could potentially lead to a big break in the case. The FBI shared that the glove appears to match those worn by the suspect in that surveillance video from Guthrie's front door camera. The DNA profile of the unknown male will soon be put into a national DNA database called CODIS to see if there's a match to anybody who's been convicted of a crime in another state. Let's bring in Cece Moore, a DNA genealogy expert. So, Cece, the sheriff has not said what kind of DNA they found in the house and on that glove. Does it make a difference if it's touch DNA versus blood DNA?
It really won't. They will be able to extract that DNA and create a profile either way. The equipment that we use now, and in particular this lab in Florida uses, is really fantastic. It's really come a long way. And so I would be confident that regardless of the type of DNA, that they will be able to generate that full profile.
Weeks. Not months, not years, weeks. That is the timeline Cece Moore put on the record when she spoke to TMZ about the Nancy Guthrie investigation. Moore is the chief genetic genealogist at Parabon Nanolabs, the forensic genomics company that has used DNA evidence to solve more than 300 criminal cases, including cold cases that had been sitting untouched for 3 and 4 decades. She did not speak in generalities. She did not offer cautious optimism wrapped in qualifications. She said specifically that if investigators obtain a viable DNA profile from the evidence already collected inside Nancy Guthrie's home in Tucson, Arizona, genetic genealogy will identify the kidnapper, and it will do so within weeks, possibly days. The FBI's Genetic Genealogy Unit is standing by right now. The databases containing more than 50 million consumer DNA profiles are accessible through established legal process. The warrant mechanism exists and has been used before in cases exactly like this one. The family tree analysis that turns a partial DNA match into a named individual is a process Cece Moore and her team have performed more than 300 times. Every component of the pipeline that leads from a DNA sample to a name on a warrant is operational and ready. The only thing missing is one specific piece of software, and the company building that software is working on it right now on a fast-tracked development schedule, specifically for cases like Nancy Guthrie's. That is where this investigation stands today, and understanding exactly why that software matters, what it does, and what happens the moment it works is what this video is about. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She is the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-host of NBC's Today Show. She was reported missing from her home in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona, on the morning of February 1, 2026, after having dinner with family the night before. She was dropped off at her home, went inside, and was never seen again. The doorbell camera at her property went offline at 1:47 in the morning. At 2:12, software detected a person on a camera inside the house. Her pacemaker monitoring application disconnected from its system at 2:28. The call reporting her missing came the following morning. As of today, more than 70 days later, she has not been found. No suspect has been publicly identified by law enforcement. The Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI are both confirmed as active in the investigation. And the question that has defined every day of those 70 days remains unanswered. Who took her, and where is she now? What changed this week is that Cece Moore, one of the most credentialed forensic genealogists in the country, chose to speak publicly and specifically about exactly where the DNA evidence in this case stands and what is being done to move it forward. Her statements to TMZ are the most detailed and technically precise public accounting of the forensic DNA situation in this investigation that has been offered by any named expert since the case began. Cece Moore is not a commentator. She is not someone offering analysis from the outside looking in. She is the person who built the field of forensic genetic genealogy in this country. Before joining Parabon Nanolabs, she spent years as a private genealogist in the early days of consumer DNA testing. recognizing before almost anyone else in law enforcement that the explosion of consumer genetics had created an entirely new investigative tool. She began working with law enforcement agencies to apply that tool to cold cases, and she has not stopped since. She has personally contributed to solving more than 300 criminal cases. She has testified in federal court as an expert witness. She has trained law enforcement agencies across the country. When CeCe Moore speaks about what this technology can and cannot do, she speaks from direct operational experience that no other voice in this conversation can match. And when she chose to speak to TMZ about this specific investigation, naming the technical obstacle with precision, naming the company working to solve it, and naming a timeline for what identification would look like once the obstacle is cleared, those were deliberate choices made by someone who understands exactly what she is putting into the public record and why. Here is what she confirmed. DNA evidence was recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home. That evidence exists. It has been processed. It is at a laboratory in Florida, and it contains the genetic material of an unknown male, someone who has no documented reason to have been inside that house, someone whose DNA does not match any profile in CODIS, the FBI's national database of convicted offenders and qualifying arrestees. Whoever left that biological material inside Nancy Guthrie's home has no qualifying criminal record in the federal system. That finding sent investigators to the second pathway, investigative genetic genealogy, the same technique that identified the Golden State Killer after more than 40 years. Joseph James DeAngelo murdered at least 13 people and committed more than 50 sexual assaults across 2 decades in California. Law enforcement had his DNA from crime scenes for years and had nothing to match it against until investigators uploaded it to a genealogy database, found partial matches with distant relatives, built a family tree branch by branch, and narrowed it to a retired police officer living quietly in a suburb of Sacramento. He was arrested in 2018. He pleaded guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder. That case was considered permanently unsolvable. Genetic genealogy solved it. The same pipeline that closed the Golden State Killer case is the pipeline investigators are attempting to use right now in Tucson. And it should work. The databases are larger now than they were in 2018. The legal framework is more established. The expertise at Parabon Nanolabs and at the FBI's own genetic genealogy unit is more developed. CeCe Moore said directly that if investigators obtain a viable single-contributor DNA profile from the evidence collected at Nancy Guthrie's home, she believes identification will follow within weeks, possibly days. So why, after more than 70 days, with all of that in place, with the databases ready and the experts standing by, and the legal authority confirmed, has no name been publicly announced? The answer is technical. It is specific, and it is the reason CeCe Moore chose to speak publicly at this moment in this investigation, rather than staying quiet. The DNA recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home is not in the form that genetic genealogy databases can use, not because it was collected incorrectly, not because investigators failed to preserve it, not because the laboratory in Florida has been slow or careless, but because the sample exists as what forensic scientists call a complex mixture. Multiple people's genetic material collected from the same surface, tangled together in a single sample in a way that the current state of forensic technology cannot cleanly separate. And without a clean, single contributor profile, the 50 million profiles sitting in those databases cannot be searched in any way that produces a result investigators can work with. That is the wall. And understanding exactly what that wall is made of, and exactly what is being built to break through it, is where this investigation stands right now. To understand why the DNA mixture is such a significant obstacle, you need to understand what genetic genealogy actually requires from a sample. Because the gap between what investigators have and what the databases need is precise, and CeCe Moore explained it with a precision that deserves the same treatment here. Most people familiar with true crime know about CODIS, the FBI's combined DNA index system. When forensic labs process crime scene DNA, they generate what is called an STR profile, short tandem repeat profile, which maps a specific set of genetic markers and searches them against a database of known offender profiles. CODIS has been used in millions of investigations, but it has one hard limitation. If the person responsible has never been arrested or convicted, they are not in the system. The evidence sits there with nothing to match against. Genetic genealogy solves that problem by asking a different question entirely. Instead of asking whether the crime scene DNA directly matches a known offender, it asks whether that DNA partially matches anyone related to the person who left it. Because DNA is inherited, a database of ordinary people who happen to share common ancestors with a suspect becomes a map that leads straight to them. But here is the critical detail that changes everything in this investigation. Genetic genealogy does not use STR profiles. It requires ASNP profile, single nucleotide polymorphism, the same type of genetic data that Ancestry and 23andMe generate when you mail in a saliva sample. ASNP profile examines between 600,000 and 1 million individual positions across a person's entire genome. When that profile is uploaded to a genealogy database, the system finds partial matches with distant relatives, and a skilled genealogist builds a family tree from those matches until the branches converge on a single individual. That is the process. It works. C.C. Moore has used it more than 300 times, but it requires one foundational thing before any of it can begin: a clean profile from a single contributor. And the DNA from inside Nancy Guthrie's home does not currently exist in that form. Moore confirmed to TMZ that the sample is a complex mixture, meaning it contains genetic material from more than 2 unknown individuals simultaneously. Every surface inside a home that has been lived in for years accumulates biological traces from multiple people: family members, visitors, caregivers, contractors. When a forensic team swabs that surface, everything on it comes up together. Separating those contributions back into individual profiles is called deconvolution. For standard STR analysis, which examines roughly 20 genetic locations, deconvolution tools exist and work reasonably well. But SNP profiling examines up to 1 million positions simultaneously. At that scale, the mathematical complexity of separating multiple contributors compounds in ways that current algorithms cannot reliably resolve. Moore was direct about this. The software that can cleanly deconvolve a complex SNP mixture into individual contributor profiles does not yet exist in a validated, legally defensible form. That is not a criticism of the investigators or the laboratory. It is the current frontier of forensic science. And it is the specific reason the 50 million profiles sitting in accessible databases have not yet been searched. This is where the second critical development in Moore's TMZ interview becomes significant. She did not end with the obstacle. She named the solution. A company called Estra is actively developing software engineered specifically to solve the SNP mixture deconvolution problem. Moore confirmed this on the record. She described the development as fast-tracked, a word she chose deliberately. Fast-tracked means the development timeline has been actively compressed. The resources, the personnel, the computational infrastructure, all of it accelerated specifically for cases like this one. Moore's own organization, Parabon Nanolabs, is one of the most sophisticated forensic genomics companies in the country. If a validated solution to this problem already existed, her team would be using it. The fact that she pointed publicly to Estra as the company developing the needed capability is itself a statement about the state of the field. The solution is being built. It is not here yet, but it is being built on a timeline that is being aggressively managed. There is a second pathway Moore identified that runs parallel to the software development: the possibility of recovering additional DNA evidence from a secondary location. A vehicle is a crime scene. Any location where Nancy was held or transported is a crime scene. Surfaces in those secondary locations would carry the suspect's biological material without the decades of competing DNA that saturate every surface inside a home where someone has lived for years. A clean sample from a secondary scene would not face the mixture problem. It could go directly to the genealogy databases without waiting for Estra's software. Moore also recommended that investigators return to Nancy Guthrie's home and re-swab surfaces that may not have been collected on the first pass. She said DNA is hardy. It persists longer than most people assume. She pointed specifically to the bite flashlight the suspect was documented carrying in his mouth during the 40 minutes he spent inside the house. The moment he removed that flashlight from his mouth, saliva transferred to the outside of his glove and potentially to any surface he subsequently touched. Saliva DNA is among the richest biological sources available to forensic analysts. If he set that flashlight down, if he touched a counter or a door frame or a wall without the glove covering that transfer point, biological material may still be present on a surface that was not swabbed during the initial evidence collection. That recommendation sits on the public record. Whether it has been acted on is a question the Pima County Sheriff's Department has not answered publicly. And given what former United States Surgeon General Richard Carmona said about the crime scene being permanently corrupted, given the no-confidence vote Sheriff Nanos received from within his own department, and given the documented reporting that the sergeant initially placed in charge of the homicide unit had never personally led a homicide investigation before this case, the question of whether every available forensic opportunity has been fully pursued is not a peripheral concern. It is the question that connects every thread of this investigation to the one development that could change everything in a matter of weeks. Because if Estra's software works, if it produces a clean, individual SNP profile from the complex mixture already sitting in that Florida laboratory, what happens next is not uncertain. C.C. Moore said it plainly to TMZ. If investigators get a viable profile, genetic genealogy will definitely solve it, and it will be solved within weeks. She was not offering encouragement. She was describing a pipeline that is fully built, fully staffed, and waiting for one specific input to begin running. Here is what that pipeline looks like in concrete terms. The moment a clean, single-contributor SNP profile is extracted from the DNA evidence in this case, it gets uploaded to the genealogy databases. Those databases, GED Match and Family Tree DNA, together hold nearly 2 million profiles from people who have opted in to allow law enforcement access. That number sounds smaller than the 50 million profiles sitting at Ancestry and 23andMe. But 2 million profiles distributed across the American population is enough to find a familial connection to almost any individual with roots in this country. The algorithm does not look for the suspect directly. It looks for people who share enough genetic material with the unknown profile to suggest a family relationship, a second cousin, a third cousin, someone who shares a great-great-grandparent with the man who walked into Nancy Guthrie's home on the night of January 31st. From those partial matches, a genetic genealogist begins building a family tree. Branch by branch, ancestor by ancestor, the tree is reconstructed until all the branches converge on a single individual of the right age, the right biological sex, and the right geographic background to be the masked figure documented on that doorbell camera. Moore confirmed the FBI's genetic genealogy unit is ready to begin that work the moment a viable profile exists. The expertise is there. The databases are accessible through the warrant process Moore confirmed is legally established. The family tree methodology that she and her team have applied to more than 300 cases is ready to be applied to this one. The pipeline from viable profile to named individual is not theoretical. It has a documented track record in federal court. It has produced convictions. It works. And beyond GED Match and Family Tree DNA, Moore raised a possibility that has received almost no attention in the broader coverage of this case. She said she believes the FBI will likely serve warrants on the larger databases, Ancestry and 23andMe together. 50 million profiles. Companies that do not voluntarily cooperate with law enforcement, but that cannot override a federal court order. A valid warrant compels production of records regardless of a company's stated privacy policy. Moore confirmed this on the record. The legal authority exists. The databases are accessible through that process. And 50 million profiles represents roughly 15% of the entire United States population, a coverage density well past the threshold at which virtually any individual with living relatives in this country can be reached through the family tree methodology. The 23andMe bankruptcy proceedings add a dimension worth watching carefully. When a company enters bankruptcy, its data becomes an asset subject to the oversight of the court managing the proceedings. Privacy advocates and legal scholars have been monitoring those proceedings closely, pressing for specific protections on how that genetic data can be transferred or accessed. The outcome of those proceedings will have implications not just for this case, but for how consumer genetic data interacts with law enforcement for years to come. Moore is watching. Investigators are watching. And this community should be watching too. What CeCe Moore chose not to say in her TMZ interview is as significant as what she did say. She did not say the investigation is stalled. She did not describe the DNA evidence as a dead end. She did not characterize the technical obstacle as permanent or insurmountable. Every element of her public statement pointed toward a specific problem with a specific solution in active development on a compressed timeline. That framing, a solvable obstacle rather than a closed door, is meaningful when it comes from the person who built this field. She also chose TMZ deliberately, not a forensic science journal, not a law enforcement publication. TMZ, one of the highest traffic news platforms in the country, with an audience that includes millions of people who have been following this case since February. Moore understood who she was addressing and what she wanted that audience to understand. The pathway to identification is real. It is close, and it is being actively pursued. That is what she chose to put into public circulation at this specific moment in this investigation. There is one more thing worth stating clearly, because this community has been part of this investigation in ways that go beyond passive viewership. Sustained public attention on missing persons cases has documented effects on how those cases are resourced and prioritized. When millions of people are watching, when every public statement is being scrutinized, when every inconsistency is being tracked and cataloged across platforms and across months, the institutional cost of deprioritizing a case rises. The pressure to keep resources allocated stays elevated. The willingness of witnesses and adjacent parties to come forward increases. This community has been doing that work since February 1st. Independent investigators have walked the washes behind properties connected to this case and found clothing that formal search operations missed. Forensic analysts in this community have identified behavioral markers in the doorbell footage. Former federal agents have named specific investigative tactics on the record. The community has consistently been ahead of what official channels have shared publicly. That is not a coincidence. That is what sustained, serious, evidence-based attention produces. CeCe Moore's decision to speak publicly at this moment with this level of specificity about where the DNA evidence stands and what is being built to move it forward is itself a signal that the people closest to this technology believe a development is coming. The software is being built. The databases are ready. The experts are standing by. And somewhere in a laboratory in Florida, the DNA of the man who took Nancy Guthrie from her home in the Catalina foothills on the night of January 31st, 2026, is sitting in a sample that the next generation of forensic software may be able to read. Here is the question we want you to answer in the comments. Do you believe the FBI will serve warrants on Ancestry and 23andMe to access those 50 million profiles before Estra's software is ready? Or do you think investigators are waiting specifically for the deconvolution technology so they have a profile strong enough to actually search those databases with? That distinction matters for the timeline, and this community's analysis on that question is worth having. If you have been following the Nancy Guthrie investigation on this channel and you are not yet subscribed, now is the moment. Every confirmed development in this case gets covered here as it happens, with named sources, documented facts, and the kind of sustained analytical attention that this investigation has demanded from the beginning. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for more than 70 days. The technology that may identify the person responsible is being built right now. This channel will be here the moment anything changes. This video is produced for informational and educational purposes only. All facts presented as confirmed are sourced from named, on-record public statements and published mainstream media reporting. CC Moore's statements cited in this video were made by her publicly to TMZ and reflect her own expert analysis. They do not represent the confirmed positions or plans of the FBI, the Pima County Sheriff's Department, or any other law enforcement agency. No individual has been named or implied as a suspect in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. All analytical content has been explicitly labeled as analysis throughout. If you have information related to the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, please contact the Pima County Sheriff's Department or submit a tip directly to the FBI at tips.fbi.gov.